I was just trying to grow tomatoes and raise my daughter in peace. That was the whole dream. Nothing fancy. No white picket fence. No manicured hedges. No HOA newsletters in my mailbox telling me how short my grass should be. Just soil, space, and the quiet joy of watching things grow. I had saved for years to buy this place, a small old farmhouse just outside of a gated subdivision called Oak Hollow. I made sure, before I even signed a single piece of paper, that the house was not part of any homeowners association. The boundary line was clear. The documents were clean. I even had a signed letter from the county office confirming that my property fell outside any HOA jurisdiction. But none of that mattered to Karen. Karen Monroe, president of the Oak Hollow HOA, self-declared guardian of community standards, made it her personal mission to break me. At first, it was little things. A folded note taped to my gate saying my lawn was visibly disruptive to the neighborhood aesthetic. A picture of my shed, mailed to me anonymously, with the words non-compliant structure scribbled across the back. My daughter, Sophie, came home one day in tears after a woman she didn't recognize told her she couldn't play on the gravel path in front of our fence because it disrupted pedestrian harmony. That woman was Karen. I tried to stay calm. I tried to be civil. I wrote a short letter, printed and signed, kindly informing the Oak Hollow HOA that I was not, nor had I ever been, a member of their community, that my home was purchased outside their zone, and I was not subject to their rules or enforcement. I even attached the boundary map, circled in red. A week later, I received a fine. Hand-delivered, not mailed. It accused me of unauthorized gardening and demanded a fee of $175 for an aesthetic planting. I laughed at first, thought it was a bad joke, but then more arrived. A second fine for my chicken coop. A third for my mailbox color. The language escalated. The letters started arriving in envelopes stamped with the HOA seal. One included a form titled Notice of Ongoing Violation Subject to Corrective Action. I still tried to be rational. I called the county office again. They confirmed, once again, I was not within HOA boundaries. I filed a complaint. They logged it. Nothing more. I called the sheriff's office. They said unless someone trespassed, there was nothing they could do. Then the real harassment started. A drone began flying over my property. At first it hovered high, barely noticeable, but then it started dipping low over my garden, near the shed, even around the windows. Sophie grew afraid of going outside. My dog barked for hours at a time. One night, I found two men standing at the edge of my yard with clipboards, taking photos of my chicken coop. When I shouted at them, they quickly got into a car and sped off, but not before I caught a glimpse of a decal on the door. Oak Hollow Community Enforcement. I knew then this wasn't going to go away with letters or polite conversations. Karen wasn't confused. She was pushing, testing, hoping I would be too scared, too exhausted, or too overwhelmed to fight back. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't the kind of woman who backed down from bullies, especially not ones with laminated badges and fake authority. And what she really didn't know was that the cameras I had installed weren't just a watch for coyotes or raccoons. They were motion-activated, high definition, synced to the cloud and time-stamped. Every footstep on my property, every drone that crossed my airspace, every vehicle that pulled into my drive. I had all of it, so I started gathering. I created a folder, backed up everything twice. I kept a log, dates, times, incidents. I started documenting everything. I posted a short video on TikTok. Not a rant, just a calm explanation of what was happening. I showed the drone footage, the fines, the boundary map. That video got shared over 20,000 times in 2 days. People started reaching out, strangers from across the country. Some said they'd been through the same thing. Some offered help. One woman sent me a name, a field agent at the FBI who was part of a task force investigating real estate corruption and HOA abuse. I didn't hesitate. I sent the file. Not a story, not a complaint, a report with documentation, footage, photos, and the county boundary letter attached. I didn't expect a response. I didn't even expect them to read it. But 2 weeks later, they knocked on my door. A black SUV, 2 plain-clothed agents with badges, credentials, and a folder marked preliminary inquiry. They asked if I could speak privately. I nodded. We sat at the kitchen table. I offered them coffee. They declined. We've been investigating multiple cases of unlawful enforcement actions by HOAs operating outside their legal authority, one of them said. Your submission included patterns we've seen in other jurisdictions, but your documentation is the most thorough we've received. They flipped open the folder. Photos, maps, a list of names. Oak Hollow was already on their radar. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about my garden or my shed. It was bigger. Karen thought she was just bullying a quiet woman who liked tomatoes. She had no idea what was coming. Angela Dawson had never been a fighter. She didn't grow up looking for conflict or chasing after justice with a sword in hand. She grew up in a quiet family, in a quiet town, and she believed in the idea that if you worked hard, minded your business, and kept your head down, the world would more or less leave you alone. At 41, a widow and single mother, all she wanted was a soft place to raise her daughter, plant her garden, and live on her own terms. After losing her husband in a highway accident 3 years ago, Angela spent every waking moment saving, planning, hoping to find somewhere they could start fresh. That search had led her to a weathered old farmhouse in a forgotten corner of West Pine, just past the gates of a planned community called Oak Hollow, but safely, legally, and clearly outside its reach. Before she signed the deed, Angela triple-checked the boundaries. She pulled up county maps, requested surveys, and even had the county clerk sign a letter confirming that the parcel, Lot 32B, was not and had never been under the jurisdiction of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association. It was a matter of principle for her. She had seen what HOAs could do to families back in the city. Fines for basketball hoops, threats over laundry lines, seniors evicted over unpaid flower bed violations. She wanted no part of that. Her land, her rules. And for a while, that's exactly what she had. A little peace, a little silence. Her days were slow and full. Morning coffee on the porch, boots in the soil by 7, teaching Sophie multiplication at the picnic table by 10. She built a chicken coop from leftover barnwood and let the hens roam free under the apple trees. She painted the shutters a soft yellow because it made her feel like the house was smiling. Sophie planted carrots, even though they came up crooked. Angela started to sleep again, eat again, breathe. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late April, the knock came. Not loud, not angry, just 3 polite taps. Angela opened the door and found a woman standing there with a clipboard, a forced smile, and a beige cardigan that looked like it had never seen dirt. She introduced herself as Karen Monroe, president of the Oak Hollow HOA. She spoke in a tone that was syrupy sweet but packed tight with steel. Mrs. Dawson, we wanted to welcome you to the extended Oak Hollow community. We've recently passed an expansion resolution, and your home now falls within our jurisdiction. I brought you a compliance packet to get started. Angela blinked, confused. I don't think so, she said slowly. This property is outside the HOA line. The county confirmed it. I have documentation. Karen's smile tightened. Yes, I understand. But the board passed a new perimeter adjustment to better unify the neighborhood aesthetic. It's already been filed with the association office. Angela didn't raise her voice. She simply repeated herself. I'm not a member of your HOA, and I didn't agree to any of this. Please leave my property. Karen left the packet on the porch step and walked away without another word. Angela tossed it in the burn barrel that afternoon. A week later, she received a letter in the mailbox marked official notice. It cited her for unauthorized outbuilding construction, referring to the chicken coop, and stated that her property was out of color compliance with the neighborhood theme. It demanded removal of the coop and repainting of the shutters within 15 days. The letter was printed on HOA letterhead, but again, there was no county seal, no legal reference, and no indication that it had come from any recognized authority. Angela took it to the local sheriff's office, where the deputy shrugged and said it sounded like a civil issue. She went to the county clerk, who repeated that the parcel was not listed under HOA control. Angela sent a certified letter to Oak Hollow, reiterating her exemption status and asking that they cease further contact. She attached the boundary maps, the original letter from the county, and her deed. 2 days later, she received another citation. This time, it claimed she was operating an unlicensed agricultural facility and threatened escalating fines for failure to register her livestock. Around that time, strangers started appearing. Men with clipboards stood at the edge of her property taking photos. A white SUV idled across the road every morning. Once, she caught someone in khaki slacks walking along the fence, pointing a phone at the garden beds. Angela yelled. The man walked away quickly without a word. Then the drone came. It buzzed low over her shed, circling the coop and barn like a vulture. Sophie cried the first time it hovered above the porch. Angela filed another complaint with the sheriff. She was told that unless the drone was proven to be armed or causing damage, it was not a criminal matter. She called a local attorney, who told her he could send a cease and desist for a fee, but unless there was direct trespassing, it would be hard to enforce. Still, Angela didn't fold. She documented everything, took photos, logged dates and times, backed up video footage from the trail cameras she had hidden in the trees. But then things escalated further. One morning, she found a manila envelope slipped under her door. Inside was $500 in cash and a handwritten note. It read, "Join Oak Hollow and live in peace. We can waive your violations and include you in future development benefits." There was no signature. Angela stared at the money for a long time. Then she tossed it into the fire. She called the county again. The clerk sounded sympathetic, but said unless Angela could prove harassment or property damage, there wasn't much they could do. "It's all paperwork wars," the clerk said. "HOAs are good at making noise without actually crossing lines." But Angela knew that wasn't true, because a week later, she woke up to find her coop door open and one of her hens missing. Feathers were scattered across the grass. The latch had been undone, not broken. Her cameras showed two figures walking through the yard at 2:47 a.m. They wore hoodies, but one of them had an HOA armband on his sleeve. Angela sat at her kitchen table with the footage playing on loop. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just downloaded every clip, filed every letter, and started assembling a case. No one had protected her. Not the sheriff. Not the county. Not the system. So she would protect herself. And if no one else would stop Karen, she would make sure someone with real power did. That was the day she started reaching out to the people who had commented on her video. That was the day she created a new folder labeled FBI Evidence. Because if HOA Karen wanted a war, she had just picked the wrong woman to start one with. And Angela wasn't going to fight back with anger or noise. She was going to fight back with proof. With cameras. With timelines. And with the truth. Because she didn't plant her roots just to have someone dig them up. She had bought her land. She had earned her peace. And now, she was going to defend it, one recorded clip at a time. Angela had spent weeks preparing for what she feared might happen, though a part of her still hoped it never would. The cameras she installed weren't just placed around the coop and the back fence anymore. She had gone further, embedding small, weatherproof devices along the tree line, underneath the porch, and inside the roof overhang of the shed. Each camera had a motion sensor and auto-uploaded video directly to cloud storage. She labeled them by zones, time-stamped everything, and made backups on encrypted drive she kept hidden inside a coffee can under the barn floor. She wasn't paranoid. She was practical, and she was done playing defense. Then it happened. One night, just past 2 a.m., her phone buzzed. Motion detected near the coop. Angela sat up in bed, reached for the monitor, and pulled up the feed. What she saw made her blood turn cold. Two figures were on her land, crouched by the chicken coop. One of them was fiddling with the latch, working slowly and deliberately, as if they had done it before. The other stood watch near the fence, scanning the property. The closer figure turned slightly and caught the light from the sensor. The camera caught a clear view of his arm. He was wearing a patch. The logo was unmistakable, a stylized oak tree encircled by text. Oak Hollow Homeowners Association. Angela didn't scream. She didn't panic. She slid out of bed, grabbed her phone, and dialed the sheriff's office. When she reported the trespass and described the individuals, the dispatcher hesitated. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "unless there's immediate danger or damage, this might fall under civil dispute jurisdiction." She explained again, emphasized the trespass, the footage, the badge. The dispatcher repeated the same line. "It sounds like an ongoing civil matter with a private entity. You might want to contact an attorney." She hung up. sat in the dark for a moment. Then she stood, pulled on her coat, and walked into the cold night air. The coop door was open. One of the hinges had been bent. Feathers were scattered across the grass. Two of the hens were missing. She knelt down, heart pounding, not with fear but with something deeper, sharper. Resolve. They wanted her to feel powerless. They wanted her to feel afraid. They were pushing her, hoping she'd either give in or break. But what they didn't know was that Angela Dawson had reached her limit. That same morning, just before sunrise, Angela filmed a video. She didn't rehearse it. She sat on her porch with the dawn behind her, held up her phone, and spoke with a calm voice that trembled only slightly. She explained everything. The false HOA claims, the letters, the drone, the envelope of cash, the threats, the chicken coop. She showed the footage, played the video of the two men, paused on the badge. She showed the maps, the documents proving she was outside HOA boundaries. She ended the video with one sentence. This is not just my story. If they're doing it to me, they're doing it to someone else. If this video reaches you, and you've been bullied by an HOA, speak up. You're not alone. She posted it to TikTok, then to YouTube, then to Facebook. By noon, it had 30,000 views. By the next day, it had over 200,000. Comments poured in from everywhere. Hashtag Justice for Angela began trending. People shared their own stories. Fines for garden gnomes. Lawsuits over mailbox colors. One woman said she lost custody of her child because the HOA labeled her house a nuisance. Another man said his HOA tried to foreclose on his home over unpaid $25 late fees. Angela read every comment. Some brought her to tears. Others made her furious. One caught her attention. You need to send this to the FBI. They've been investigating HOA racketeering in Florida and Nevada. You might be part of something bigger. She hesitated for half a day. Then she did it. She composed a full report, attached the videos, the photos, the timestamps, the certified letters, the legal documents, the county boundary map, everything. She emailed it to a federal tip line listed under the Department of Justice's white-collar crime division. Then she waited. A week passed. She kept documenting, kept recording, kept scanning the skies for drones. Then, on a Thursday morning, a black SUV pulled into her driveway. Two people stepped out, one man, one woman, both in plain clothes, both wearing visible FBI credentials. They approached the house respectfully. Angela stepped out to meet them. Angela Dawson? The man asked. She nodded. He introduced himself as Agent Reyes. His partner was Agent McNeil. We've been reviewing a number of similar reports involving HOA overreach, enforcement impersonation, and coordinated harassment. Your case stood out due to the volume and clarity of your documentation. We'd like to talk. She led them inside. They sat at her kitchen table for nearly 3 hours. She showed them the footage, gave them her files, offered coffee. She didn't ask what they were planning. She didn't need to. They left that afternoon with a copy of everything and a quiet reassurance. We're moving on this. For days later, the raid happened. Federal agents arrived at the Oak Hollow HOA office. Just after 7 a.m., neighbors watched as boxes were carried out, computers loaded into vans, phones collected, files sealed. News cameras showed up by mid-morning. Reporters stood on the sidewalks asking if anyone knew why the FBI had come. No one answered. Angela stayed home. She watched from the couch, holding Sophie close, fingers trembling around a mug of untouched tea. That evening, she received a call from Agent Reyes. They had found what they suspected. Fake court documents, falsified code enforcement citations, and signed letters prepared to appear as legal mandates. A draft version of a property seizure memo addressed to her by name. A second envelope containing surveillance photos of her daughter playing in the yard. Angela's stomach dropped. The FBI began cross-referencing names, tracking money, pulling HOA board member financials. It unraveled quickly. At the center of it all was Karen Monroe. She had coordinated it, signed off on the false citations, authorized the drone program, and, according to internal emails, had discussed using non-affiliated compliance officers to apply pressure. But Karen was no longer at the HOA office. She had vanished the day before the raid. Her phone was off. Her house was empty, her car abandoned at a gas station 2 towns over. Angela didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window with the lights off, listening to the wind, watching the road. The next morning, a headline hit her phone. HOA president detained at local airport. Karen Monroe had been arrested trying to board a flight to Arizona. She was carrying a burner phone, 2 fake IDs, and nearly $9,000 in cash. The charges were pending, but the agents had made it clear this was just the beginning. Angela sat at her kitchen table, staring at the screen. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She was breathing. For the first time in months, she was breathing like someone had finally lifted the weight from her chest. She reached for her camera again. Pressed record. Her voice was steady now. To everyone who said I was overreacting. To everyone who said to let it go. Karen thought I would break. But I had something she didn't. Truth. Proof. And now, the law is doing what it's supposed to. This land is mine. And it's staying that way. She ended the video and hit upload. Then she turned off the lights, locked the doors, and held her daughter close. Because the fight wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. And now the ones who had hidden behind papers and threats and drones were being dragged into the light. It began with 4 sets of handcuffs and a headline. Karen Monroe, along with 3 executive board members of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association, was formally arrested and charged with a wide range of federal and state-level crimes, including abuse of civil authority, fraudulent impersonation of public officers, forgery of legal documents, unlawful surveillance, and attempted coercive seizure of private property. The charges were read aloud on the courthouse steps by the district attorney's spokesperson while cameras flashed and reporters scrambled for reactions. The footage played across television screens, YouTube clips, and social media timelines within hours. The images were almost cinematic. Karen, once smug and untouchable, now stone-faced in a gray jumpsuit, flanked by federal marshals as she was led through a secured entrance in handcuffs. She didn't speak to the press. Her attorney issued a statement that her client believed she was acting in the best interest of the community. But the evidence said otherwise. The FBI's investigation had uncovered an extensive trail of internal communications, drone surveillance files, forged county notices, cash incentives offered to property inspectors, and a private document marked Enforcement Strategy, Phase 2, that named Angela Dawson directly as a non-compliant landholder. It had listed suggestions such as strategic code escalation, drone intimidation routines, and even friendly third-party outreach offering incentives to integrate quietly. The phrase, integrate quietly, became a national meme. When it was revealed in court that Karen had used HOA funds to create unofficial enforcement agents and print fake violation letters, even members of her own neighborhood appeared in front of news cameras demanding accountability. But it was Angela who became the face of what came next. She hadn't asked for it. She had never intended to be anything more than a mother with a small garden and a chicken coop. But her videos, her composure, her documentation, and her quiet refusal to bow had captured the attention of the public. She appeared first on local news, then regional, and eventually sat down for an interview on a national morning show. In that segment, the host asked her a simple question: "What gave you the courage to stand up to an entire HOA?" Angela responded, "Because this land is mine. Because I told my daughter we were safe here. And because when someone tries to take what's yours through fear and fraud, silence is surrender." That line, "Silence is surrender," was quoted, clipped, and shared across every major platform. Civil rights lawyers, small-town mayors, community advocates, and thousands of ordinary people began sharing their own HOA stories under the hashtag Silence is Surrender. The Department of Justice, recognizing the scale and similarities across multiple HOA abuse cases nationwide, reached out to Angela directly through the FBI. They proposed she become a public liaison and civilian advisor for a federal task force aimed at investigating and curbing HOA-related misconduct and land intimidation. Angela accepted. She wasn't interested in politics or power, but she understood the power of precedent. If she could use her experience to prevent just one more family from being harassed into compliance or chased off their own land, it would be worth it. The case went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts within 3 days. Karen and the other 3 board members were sentenced to federal prison, terms ranging from 7 to 15 years. The court also handed down a rare structural ruling. The Oak Hollow HOA was to be dissolved permanently and barred from reconstituting or reorganizing under any name or legal structure for the next 30 years. All HOA-controlled property, including its offices, equipment, and remaining financial reserves, was ordered liquidated to pay restitution to victims. Angela was awarded full financial compensation for property damage, emotional distress, legal costs, and punitive damages totaling nearly $1.2 million. But it wasn't the money that changed things. It was the precedent. Other communities began to challenge their HOAs. Legal clinics reported a surge in calls. Angela started receiving handwritten letters from people across the country, some thanking her, others asking for advice. It was one such letter from a retired schoolteacher in Nevada who had lost her home after a disputed HOA lien that inspired Angela's next step. She gathered a small group of volunteers, all former HOA victims, and created an organization called Freeland Citizens. It was built on one idea: that no one should fear fines, threats, or legal intimidation simply for wanting to live peacefully on land they legally own. Freeland Citizens offered basic legal education, access to pro bono attorneys, media outreach training, and a growing database of predatory HOA practices across the country. Within months, they had opened satellite chapters in 6 states. Angela, without ever asking for the title, became the national voice of property rights advocacy. She gave talks at town halls. She appeared in webinars for law schools. She testified before a congressional subcommittee on real estate governance and civil liberty abuse. She never shouted. She never raged. She just told her story plainly and truthfully, the same way she had done the first time she hit record on her porch. Her daughter, Sophie, now 10 years old, stood proudly beside her during many of these moments. Angela never stopped tending her garden. She still woke up early, fed the chickens, checked the fencing, and walked the perimeter of her land. She still painted the shutters yellow. But now, people driving by would sometimes stop and ask for a picture beside the wooden sign that hung at the gate. It read, "This land is free. This family is too." The woman they had tried to fine into silence, scare into submission, or bribe into compliance had instead become a rallying point for thousands. When a reporter once asked her if she saw herself as a hero, she shook her head and said, "No, I see myself as someone who knew I had something to protect, and I chose to protect it." Karen's name faded. Her story became a footnote in legal seminars. But Angela's story lived on, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest, because it proved that even the smallest voice can become undeniable when backed by truth, and because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to step aside. The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the land as Angela sat in her favorite rocking chair on the porch, a chipped blue mug of tea cradled between her palms. The breeze was light, warm, and carried the scent of mint, damp soil, and just a hint of rosemary from the herb beds. The chickens clucked lazily in the distance, pecking their way around the garden beds where Sophie had spent the morning laying down crushed eggshells and planting zinnias. Now, the little girl was laughing in the middle of the mustard flower patch, her arms stretched wide as she chased a butterfly that never quite let her catch it. Angela smiled softly, rocking in rhythm with the wind. She wasn't dressed up for anything, just an old cotton dress, worn clean at the elbows, bare feet tucked beneath her. But there was peace in her chest now, a stillness she hadn't known in a long time. The kind that wasn't quiet because she was hiding, but because nothing needed defending, not today. The house stood stronger than it had ever been, not because of walls or locks, but because of everything they had survived. The porch had new boards, the windows new glass, but more than that, the whole place felt anchored by something deeper, by what it meant now, not just to her, but to everyone who had watched her stand her ground. A camera lens, fixed above the porch light, and mostly forgotten these days, continued its silent work part of the system she had once relied on like armor. She still kept the files, backed up and encrypted, but she hadn't needed to open them in months. People didn't come to harass her anymore. If anything, they came to listen. Sometimes they brought pie or stories, or just sat on the porch to thank her for showing them it was possible to win. The road to that moment hadn't been paved with grand speeches or marches. It had been built one night at a time, one camera clip, one refusal to bow. The world hadn't given her power. It had tested the one she already had. And now, that power lived not in the court transcripts or the news interviews, but in the way her daughter ran freely without fear, in the smell of fresh earth turned by her own hands, in the confidence that no HOA letter would ever again show up in her mailbox. That mailbox, by the way, had never been changed. It was still bright green, still standing proud and unapproved, just as it had been when the first citation threatened to tear her life apart. That citation was now framed and hanging on the wall inside the hallway, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how it started and what it had cost to finish it. Her phone buzzed once on the armrest beside her. A new email, probably another request to speak at some conference, to join another advocacy call, to sit on another panel. She had done a few when they mattered, when she felt her presence would actually help people. But more often these days, she chose the garden, the sunrise, her daughter's laughter. She had already said everything that needed saying. Everything else was echoes. Across the yard, past the chicken run and the row of sunflowers, stood the old cedar gate with a wooden sign she had carved with her own hands 1 week after the court ruling. The lettering was slightly uneven, but the message couldn't be clearer. This land is free. No HOA, no fear. That sign had appeared in hundreds of social media posts, turned into bumper stickers, and even once been spray-painted across a city wall 2 states over. She hadn't asked for any of that, but she understood why it happened. People needed a symbol, something to point to and say, see, it's possible. What had started as a woman defending her tomatoes and chickens had become a map for others to follow. She didn't become a hero. She became a mirror, one that showed people they had rights, that fear wasn't strategy, that quiet does not mean weak. Karen had once stood on that very porch, eyes scanning the yard like it was waiting for her approval, and said with a rehearsed calm, "You'll regret fighting us." Angela had met her gaze and answered without flinching, "No, you'll regret underestimating a mother with proof and a camera." It hadn't been meant to sound brave. It was just the truth. And Karen had indeed underestimated her. She thought Angela was just a simple woman growing vegetables, trying to play house on the edge of civilization, an easy target with no power, no voice, no backup. She didn't expect the cameras. She didn't expect the documentation. She didn't expect the internet. And she definitely didn't expect the FBI. That part, Angela still chuckled about when she thought of it. The way the agents had shown up so quietly, so politely, like help arriving after a long storm. They didn't kick down doors or raise flags. They listened, they took notes, and then they did what needed doing. The law had finally worked the way it was supposed to. Not because Angela screamed loud enough, but because she spoke clearly enough. Because she had receipts. She had facts. She had video, signatures, timestamps, boundary lines, and the patience to wait while the truth caught up with the lies. Now, as the lights softened and Sophie flopped down in the middle of the mustard flowers, her face toward the sky, Angela leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The wind brushed against her cheeks like fingers. She didn't need noise anymore. She didn't need validation. All she needed was this: her home, her child, her peace. A bird called out from the oak tree at the edge of the property, and for a moment, everything stilled. Angela opened her eyes slowly, looked toward the horizon, and breathed in deep. The kind of breath that doesn't carry tension or readiness or resistance, but peace. Lasting peace. Earned peace. Behind her, the screen door creaked as Teddy, their old hound, padded out and lay down next to her chair, his head resting gently on her boot. She scratched behind his ears and whispered, "It's over, boy." And it was. The land was hers. The life was hers. The fear was gone. And the loop had finally closed, not with a bang, but with a sunrise.